The deeper one peers into the chronicles of bygone eras, the clearer a simple yet terrifying thought emerges. Humanity knows almost nothing of its true past. Official history often seems a delicate screen drawn across the ruins of a colossal and forgotten reality. Perhaps the most vivid illustration of this dissonance lies in the work of the celebrated 18th century French painter Hubert Robert. A master who traveled extensively across Europe, he left behind a legacy that now fuels fierce debate. His canvases, depicting majestic ruins, strike the viewer not merely with their artistic skill, but with a haunting, almost photographic precision. A precision entirely at odds with the accepted timeline of his age. Modern academia is quick to dismiss these scenes as products of a rich imagination. Art historians and critics speak in one voice, insisting these landscapes are mere capriccio, architectural fantasies born of a fashion for antiquity and a romantic fascination with decay. We are asked to believe the artist was simply inventing non-existent worlds to entertain a bored aristocracy. However, if one casts aside these imposed stereotypes and analyzes Robert's work with the eyes of an engineer, a profoundly different picture materializes. We are confronted with impossibly detailed colonnades, with building levels that plunge deep beneath the earth, with stone blocks fitted together with a jeweler's accuracy, far beyond the capabilities of the builders of his time. A persistent impression forms that Robert was not inventing, but recording, that he acted not as a dreamer, but as a meticulous documentarian, scrupulously sketching the world he saw with his own eyes, a world that, even then, lay in ruins. This hypothesis presents an uncomfortable, yet unavoidable question. If the artist was depicting reality, then who and when erected these cyclopean structures? The civilization of Robert's own era appears frankly primitive against the backdrop of these remnants. The people of the 18th century possessed no technology capable of restoring these giants, let alone making proper use of them. His canvases capture a strange paradox. Majestic ruins, clearly the work of a highly advanced society, stand occupied by a people living a simple, almost crude existence. Grand halls are converted into stables. Ancient temples are used as common homes. The most complex engineering marvels are simply abandoned. Every detail in these paintings silently screams that another world once existed here. A world more powerful, more technological, and more majestic than the one that came to inherit its ashes. Yet, faced with what remains of this world, the official narrative offers only silence, or explanations that crumble under the weight of the evidence. When faced with an object of forgotten purpose, Orthodox history defaults to a familiar script. It is a temple, or it is a tomb. Convenient labels that mask glaring technical inconsistencies. But within the legacy of the painter Hubert Robert, a different message is encoded. The artist seems to have left behind a cryptic chronicle of a catastrophe, the aftermath of which he was witness to. This is not merely art, it is an indictment. For if we entertain the possibility that these monumental scenes were painted from life, then the entire accepted chronology of human development begins to fracture, exposing a hidden truth and lost civilizations whose ruins we have still not learned to properly read. To immerse oneself in the detailed study of the architectural subjects captured by the master is to be confronted by a persistent, unsettling sense of disproportion. It is a feeling that permeates every inch of the space. The sensation arises instantly when analyzing the interiors of ancient structures, such as the famed Temple of Diana at Nimes. Before the observer stands not a mere building, but a colossal structure of majestic columns and flawless masonry, its quality inspiring a kind of reverential awe. The space here is organized as if it were originally designed for beings of another order entirely, for giants whose footfalls once shook the earth, not for the fragile human figures we see against the backdrop of these stone titans. The ordinary people depicted in these settings seem impossibly small, almost lost within the monumental vaults. They appear not as the masters or creators of these walls, but as incidental visitors, ants foraging at the base of primeval trees. This visual contrast creates a powerful cognitive dissonance. The architectural details, the perfectly fitted blocks, the arches and vaults engineered to bear colossal loads, testify to the highest level of engineering thought and construction technology. It is difficult to imagine such structures being erected with the methods available in the era when the painter's contemporaries wandered among these ruins. Moreover, the lower levels of many buildings are clearly submerged in earth, pointing to a process of burial, evidence of catastrophic events that transpired long before these views were ever transferred to canvas. This Lilliputian Syndrome becomes even more pronounced in his landscapes depicting waterways and canals. Long channels, receding into perspective, are framed by the massive ruins of arches and colonnades, their scale overwhelming the imagination. The arches soar to such heights that the human figures on the ground below become barely distinguishable dots, foreign objects captured in the frame by chance. The construction techniques here are no less staggering. The impeccable geometry, the complex repeating ornamentation, it all speaks not of a world in decay, but of a world of a different genesis. Perhaps we are not looking at the ruins of our own past, but at the remnants of a world that preceded ours, a world built to a scale we no longer comprehend. The figures in the paintings are not our ancestors admiring their heritage. They are us, wanderers in a garden of giants, struggling to read a history that was never written for our eyes. Precise mathematical calculations, vaults engineered to withstand unimaginable pressure. These are the vestiges of an infrastructure built by a civilization that possessed technologies beyond the grasp of subsequent eras. And yet, the figures who wander these landscapes, along the banks of grandiose canals, beneath the arches of shattered temples, move as passive observers. There is no creation in their actions, no comprehension of the monumental forms that surround them. They live in the shadow of giants, oblivious to the true scale of their inheritance. A persistent feeling emerges that these are Lilliputians inhabiting the empty shell of a far more powerful predecessor. They do not appear as builders, as minds capable of conceiving and erecting such wonders. Their very presence highlights a chasm, a profound abyss between the architects of these masterpieces and those who came after. This dissonance between the cyclopean scale of the construction and the insignificance of its new inhabitants presents a haunting idea that this new humanity is but a parasitic element on the body of a dead titan. Generations have simply occupied the space left behind, with no conception of how this world once functioned at its zenith. They drift among the fragments, using them as a backdrop for a more primitive existence, never asking who truly raised these walls. And if these people were not the builders, a logical and unsettling question arises. Who was the true architect of this vanished reality? And where did they go? The ones for whom these colossal dimensions were the norm. The answer is not found in textbooks, but in the chronicle of a great civilizational decline. The evidence lies in how this incomprehensible legacy is used. A glaring technological and cultural gap separates the creators from the inheritors. Before us unfolds a society of scavengers, inhabitants of a post-apocalyptic world that has forgotten its own past. Nowhere is this more vivid than in the scenes of daily life. Grandiose ancient structures are repurposed for the most primitive domestic needs. In the ruins of great public baths, a startling contrast emerges. Massive stone vaults, majestic colonnades, and perfectly engineered arches, once monuments to civic pride and engineering prowess, now serve as mere scenery for washing laundry and bathing bodies. The magnificent is made mundane, the sacred profane. It is a quiet testament to a world undone, not by cataclysm, but by a slow, creeping amnesia. The greatness of the past does not inspire, it merely provides shelter, its original purpose lost to the echoes of time, leaving only the question of what we become when we can no longer remember what we were once capable of building. The water that pools in these ancient reservoirs might once have been the lifeblood of a vast hydraulic system, its true purpose now lost to time. But for the figures captured in this moment, it is merely a convenient pool, a stone-lined hollow. They play in the shadows of engineering masterpieces, unaware they exist within the heart of a complex technical apparatus, built on a scale their own worldview cannot begin to fathom. This utilitarian, almost barbaric relationship with a forgotten heritage echoes across the landscape. Temples of flawless proportion, their intricate decor demanding a precision now unattainable, are repurposed as public baths, market squares, or pens for livestock. Consider a structure reminiscent of the great stone edifices of antiquity. A massive, colonnaded building that clearly served a vital function. Yet, in these scenes, we see people wandering aimlessly around its perimeter, or attempting to adapt its monumental walls for drying hay, for stringing up a temporary shelter. Fragments of capitals and cornices lie where they fell, with no one attempting to restore them to their rightful place. The local inhabitants possess neither the tools nor the knowledge to lift these multi-ton blocks, let alone to quarry and carve new ones. The new generations use these spaces only as a pre-existing backdrop for survival. They build nothing of equal value, but merely exist as parasites on the remnants of a former grandeur. Their own constructions, flimsy wooden hovels and lean-tos, appear as pathetic growths on the bodies of stone giants. It is a stark demonstration of a complete and total loss of technology. The secrets of polygonal masonry, of precisely cutting the hardest stone, of erecting seismic-resistant structures, have been irrevocably lost. Society has regressed to primitive manual labor. They are compelled to inhabit the skeleton of a deceased, highly husk of an abandoned skyscraper. The original functions of these buildings have been erased from generational memory. What we, by habit, call temples or thermal baths could have been factories, power stations, or scientific centers. But because the knowledge is gone, people invent the simplest explanations, reducing everything to religion or the mundane necessities of life. It is difficult to escape the conclusion that we are witnessing the documented aftermath of a global catastrophe. This is not the natural evolution of architecture, but survival among the ruins. The scene evokes a disturbing sense of irreversible loss. We see a society afflicted by a collective amnesia. They walk upon flagstones beneath which great secrets lie buried, but their only concern is how to shelter from the rain under a surviving vault. This profound break in the chain of knowledge forces a disquieting question: that civilization is not a continuous ascent, but a fragile state, perpetually one catastrophe away from being forgotten. The civilization that engineered these marvels did not fade gently into history, passing a torch to its heirs. It was erased, suddenly, leaving behind only silent stone and successors who had lost the key, unable to read the message encrypted in the architecture itself. What power could scour such a culture from the face of the earth, transforming its monumental achievements into little more than enigmatic stage dressing for a simpler way of life? The answer may not lie in what remains standing, but in the very manner of its destruction. A careful analysis of the ruins as they were inevitably leads to a chilling discovery. One that concerns not just the state of the buildings, but the very landscape they inhabit. If we set aside the familiar narrative of slow, natural decay over centuries, a different picture emerges: the aftermath of a geological cataclysm of unimaginable scale. The structures are not merely weathered by time, they have been buried alive. Vast deposits of earth, mud, and clay conceal entire lower stories, warping the geometry of the space, forcing a question about the nature of the disaster that engulfed this ancient world. Consider the ruins of a classical Doric temple. Its majestic columns, proportioned for perfect harmony, do not rest on a firm foundation. Instead, they appear to be sinking, drowning in silt and earth. A section of the colonnade lies shattered, the chaotic dispersal of its colossal stone drums testifying to a sudden and violent force. This is not the gentle work of wind and rain. The scene is a scar left by a tremendous shockwave or an earthquake, followed by a deluge of mud that surged through the ruins, entombing them. New life now pushes through this alien soil, a thick blanket that has swallowed the true foundations and perhaps entire subterranean levels, sealing away their secrets for all time. An even more unsettling vision is presented by the Colosseum. It appears not as a triumphant monument to antiquity, but as a colossal, half-submerged relic that has endured a great flood or a massive mud flow. Its lower tiers of arches, the logical ground-level entrances, are submerged, half or more of their height swallowed by a thick mantle of earth. Conventional history offers an explanation for this: the slow accumulation of a so-called cultural layer. The theory suggests that over 1,500 years, the debris of civilization, dust and refuse, raised the ground level by several meters. Yet any geologist or engineer would recognize the sheer impossibility of this explanation on the scale we see. To bury the first story of a structure as immense as the Colosseum requires not the dust from the sandals of citizens, but millions of tons of displaced earth, moved by a force of nature. Perhaps the greatest ruins are not the shattered columns we can see, but the buried timelines we cannot. A history written in stone, submerged by earth, waiting for a story that has not yet been told. An impossible weight of earth and rock. This is not the slow work of centuries, the gentle accumulation of dust. This is the unmistakable signature of liquefied soil, of a tsunami's slurry, of a cataclysm on a planetary scale. The structure appears as if it stood in the path of a colossal mudflow, a deluge that left behind meters of sedimentary rock, transforming the first floors of civilization into forgotten basements. Arches, which once admitted thousands of spectators, are now reduced to burrows, passages one can barely squeeze through. This is the visual testimony of a disaster that occurred in the relatively recent past. The ruins have not yet been ground to dust, but the landscape around them has been changed beyond all recognition. The nature of the destruction, the very level of the ground itself, points to a single, unsettling conclusion. The history we are taught is missing a key event. An event that did not simply topple an empire, but literally redrew the surface of the earth, burying the achievements of a high culture under a deep layer of clay and silt. We are looking at the tips of icebergs, the upper tiers of colossal edifices, while the bulk of their infrastructure lies deep beneath the feet of an unsuspecting new. Waro complex construction, it forces a total re-evaluation of these objects. How can we possibly judge the true function of a building when most of it remains hidden? Were these structures truly just palaces, temples, and arenas for entertainment? Or is the part we see merely a casing, a shell concealing complex mechanisms and systems whose meaning was lost along with their buried floors? By shifting our focus from artistic expression to engineering logic, we are forced to reconsider everything. Strip away the romantic veneer and view these ruins through the eyes of a technologist. Sudoku naive labels affixed to sophisticated technical apparatus whose true purpose has been forgotten. What has long been dismissed as decorative elements of landscape art, on closer inspection, reveals the hallmarks of massive industrial complexes. A stark example is the so-called pavilion with cascades. At first glance, an idyllic scene created to delight the eyes of the nobility. Yet the very structure of the water's flow, the hewn stone that channels it, tells another story. The cascade is not a gentle decoration. It is rigidly integrated into a massive stone construction of precise geometry, with terraces and spillways. This architecture bears less resemblance to a garden folly and more to the enduring remains of a hydroelectric dam. The ruins do not lie. They simply wait, buried in silence, for us to see not what we have been told, but what is etched into the very stone itself. It speaks the language of a sluice system, or perhaps even a hydroelectric station, more than a park decoration. The sheer mass of the wall, the precision of the dressed stone, these are the hallmarks of a structure designed to contain colossal pressures, to channel immense energies. For a simple fountain, such strength, such complexity, is utterly superfluous. The artist may have captured a fragment of a forgotten water network, an energy node whose intricate mechanisms have long since vanished. Time has transformed it into a picturesque cascade, its concrete and stone skeleton repurposed into a promenade for idle leisure. Similar question appeared as a relic from another epoch. Inside, the scale is baffling. The height of the arches, the thickness of the walls, all are profoundly excessive for a dwelling, no matter how opulent. Vast empty halls, impossible to heat or illuminate with the technology of Engars or public terminals. A persistent impression forms that the great architects of the Renaissance and later eras were not building from the ground up. They were merely refurbishing the surviving shells of ancient industrial and administrative centers. They inserted windows into gargantuan apertures, laid down new floors, and hung tapestries, attempting to domesticate spaces that were conceived for entirely different and likely technical purposes. This industrial shadow becomes undeniable when observing the Greek grafted onto ancient, megalithic foundations. The waterfront stairways and retaining walls are built from blocks of such a size and fitted with such a quality that they evoke the concrete fortifications of modern strategic installations. This was no simple mooring for wooden boats. It was a feat of high engineering, calculated for centuries of service and staggering loads. Urban life flows across the surface of these ruins, using them as an indestructible foundation, yet possessing no understanding of the principles that created them. It is a form of parasitism on the remnants of a highly advanced infrastructure, where complex logistical hubs of the past are now used as simple wharves. Taken together, these observations paint a picture of a world threaded with a sophisticated engineering network, of which only a stone skeleton remains. We are not looking at individual buildings, but at the nodes of a unified system. Power stations, factories, hydro-technical complexes. The tragedy lies in the absolute loss of knowledge, the complete inability to comprehend how this system once functioned. The figures in these landscapes are living inside a broken machine, perceiving its colossal components as mere elements of scenery, as natural as the hills and rivers themselves. It is a civilization adrift among the incomprehensible relics of its own forgotten genius. A lone hermit, praying amidst colossal ruins. This single figure becomes a metaphor for an entire epoch of humanity. A man bowing his head before a greatness whose nature he can no longer comprehend. He offers up prayers in a space that may once have been a machine hall or a laboratory. To him, these walls are sacred for one reason alone. They are magnificent, and they are beyond understanding. He seeks a spiritual answer, where precise calculation and technology once reigned, sealing the final victory of myth over knowledge. Viewed through this lens, the works of the artist Hubert Robert are transformed. He is no longer a painter indulging in the romantic fashion of decay, but a key witness to an era that can only be called a global reset. His legacy ceases to be a mere collection of picturesque canvases and becomes something else entirely. A detailed forensic report from the crash site of a highly advanced civilization. Each painting is a documented fact, a piece of physical evidence that has survived to this day, defying the attempts of both time and man to erase the memory of a genuine past. Robert was not inventing ruins. He was capturing the moment when the scars of a global catastrophe were still fresh, when the giant skeletons of buildings had not yet been dismantled for raw materials, when the sediment layer deposited by a great flood had not yet been hidden beneath new cobblestones. Faced with such visual testimony, official history finds itself in an untenable position. Academic circles prefer to either remain silent, ignoring the inconvenient details, or they offer explanations that, under the slightest scrutiny, crumble into dust. We are asked to believe that cyclopean structures, constructions that would have required sophisticated logistics, mathematical modeling, and industrial stone-cutting machinery, were built with primitive tools for religious or funerary rites. The universal answer, "It is a temple," or "It is a tomb," has become a convenient veil, hiding a profound failure to comprehend the true purpose of these technological artifacts. But the longer we gaze upon these so-called temples, the more clearly we see workshops, power stations, and engineering hubs, their functions lost along with their creators. The eye cannot be deceived, even when the textbooks insist otherwise. Before us unfolds a panorama of a world that was not merely different, but grander, more complex, and more technologically sophisticated than our own. We have been conditioned to think of progress as a linear process, leading from the primitive to the complex. But the ruins captured by Robert scream of the opposite, of involution, of a great forgetting, of the degradation of technology. We see a society not evolving, but surviving. Surviving on the wreckage of titans, adapting a monumental legacy to fit its own modest needs. To grasp this is to experience a dizzying vertigo. It is the realization that our history may not be a steady climb toward the light, but a recurring cycle of brilliance and ruin, of memory and amnesia, forever haunted by the ghosts of what we once knew. To gaze upon these canvases is to feel a profound sense of loss and an unsettling curiosity. For if these buildings truly stood, then the history of humanity is not what we have been told. It is a story far grander, filled with achievements and events deliberately omitted from the record. Each brushstroke serves as a stark reminder of civilization's inherent fragility. That which seems immutable today our sprawling cities, our monuments of steel and glass, could be tomorrow's enigmatic ruins, leaving future generations to wonder at the purpose of our world. Hubert Robert and the other masters of ruinism may have left us the keys to this mystery. Perhaps they understood that these last traces were about to vanish, buried by new construction, restored beyond recognition, or erased completely. Perhaps they hurried, not to imagine a fantasy, but to capture a fleeting truth on canvas. Their work is a message in a bottle, cast into the currents of time, in the hope that one day it would reach a shore where minds could decipher it correctly, free from the confines of imposed dogma. Today, we stand at a crossroads. We can continue to blindly accept the approved version of the past, where everything is categorized, yet the facts refuse to align. Or we can choose to trust our own eyes and our own logic. History has been rewritten, but the stone remembers all. The ruins immortalized by these artists continue their silent testimony to a world that was stolen from us. And the choice of whether to reclaim that memory rests solely with us. The path begins when we dare to ask the inconvenient questions, to seek alternative answers, and to see the familiar world through a new lens. The truth is out there, somewhere among the buried columns and the fractured arches, and the time has come to find it.